Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. For years, I knew my parents favored my sister. It wasn't even subtle. They put her on a pedestal while I was always an afterthought. But at her graduation, they didn't just ignore me. They humiliated me, in front of everyone. And that was the moment I decided I was done being their punching bag. I should probably start with some background. I'm 21M, and my sister Elena is 24F. Growing up, my parents made it very clear who the favorite was. Elena was the golden child, the smart one, the responsible one, the one who made them proud. And me? I was there. It didn't matter what I accomplished. I could never match up to Elena. She was the one they bragged about, the one they celebrated. And me? Well, let's just say my birthdays were optional events in our household. It wasn't just little things, either. They forgot my birthday more than once. They missed my school events. But when it came to Elena, they went all out. Every birthday, she had huge parties. They made a spectacle out of every accomplishment. So, when she graduated college, I knew it was going to be a big deal. What I didn't expect was how far they'd go to remind me that, in their eyes, I was nothing. The graduation party was at a huge banquet hall. All our relatives were there. Friends, neighbors, even some of Elena's professors. I wasn't bitter about it. I had accepted my role in the family. I was the one in the background, the one they barely acknowledged. But when did my parents get up to give their speech? That was when everything changed. They started normal. They talked about how hard Elena worked, how proud they were, how bright her future was. I expected that. But then, my dad joked that they should have stopped having kids after Elena. The room erupted with laughter. I just sat there, frozen. Secondborns are usually a mistake, my mom added, chuckling. Imagine if we had just stopped with Elena. We could have given her even more. More laughter. From my aunts. From my uncles. Even from some of Elena's friends. I looked around, waiting for someone to speak up. For someone, anyone, to call out how messed up this was. But no one did. They just laughed. I felt my chest tighten. I had spent years pretending their favoritism didn't bother me. I told myself that if I worked hard enough and proved myself, maybe they'd see me for once. But at that moment, I knew the truth. They didn't just prefer Elena. They genuinely wished I didn't exist. And that broke me. But then they took it one step further. As the speech wrapped up, my parents turned to Elena, beaming. And because we're so proud of you, sweetheart. They pulled out a car key. We got you your dream car. The room erupted in applause. Elena gasped, covering her mouth in fake surprise like she didn't already know. And me? I just sat there, watching my parents glow with pride over the daughter they loved. While I was just an afterthought. That was the moment I realized I was done. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love, trying to be enough. But I never would be. So why should I keep pretending? That night, as everyone celebrated Elena, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. I was going to do something they'd never expect. And when I did, it changed everything. I don't remember much of the rest of that party, just the sound of people laughing. I saw the side of my parents glowing with pride as they handed Elena the car keys. The way no one, not a single person, looked at me and thought, wow, maybe this is kind of messed up. I sat there, staring at my half-eaten food, wondering how I had let things get this bad. How I had spent my whole life begging for scraps of love from people who didn't care. And then, I made a decision. I was done. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't yell. Didn't cause a scene. No, that's what they would have expected from me, an angry outburst they could brush off as overreacting. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I planned my exit. I went home, grabbed my laptop, and started working. I had been saving up for years, not because I had some grand plan, but because I knew, deep down, that I couldn't rely on them. So, I did something I had never done before. I put myself first. I applied for an apartment. A nice one I could afford. I transferred my money to an account they didn't have access to. I started packing my things quietly, methodically. Because by the time they noticed, I was going to be gone. 2 weeks later, I was ready. I had the lease signed, my things packed, my plan locked in. And then, I sat my parents down. It was a normal evening, Mom scrolling on her phone, Dad watching the news. Elena wasn't home. Perfect. I cleared my throat. I'm moving out. They barely looked up. MHM. Where? My mom asked. An apartment across town. Dad raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are you paying for that? I smiled. With the money I saved while you were spending thousands on Elena. That got their attention. Mom set her phone down. Sweetheart, don't be ridiculous. You don't need to move out. You have everything you need here. I laughed. Oh, do I? Funny, because I don't remember getting a car. Or a graduation party. Or, basic respect. Dad sighed. This is about the party, isn't it? I crossed my arms. Oh, you mean the part where you publicly joked that I was a mistake? Or the part where you made it clear again that I don't matter? Mom rolled her eyes. Alex, you're being dramatic. I smiled. And you're proving my point. The conversation spiraled fast. They tried everything: guilt, manipulation, even bribery. We'll help you buy a car if you stay. You're making a big mistake, Alex. Family is everything. You're just upset. Let's talk about this when you've calmed down. I shook my head. No. I'm done talking. I'm done waiting for you to treat me like I matter. I'm leaving. Silence. Then, my dad scoffed. Fine. Go. But don't come crawling back when you realize you need us. I grinned. Oh, trust me. That'll never happen. Then I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. And never looked back. Walking out of that house for the last time should have felt bittersweet. But it didn't. It felt freeing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to people who had made it crystal clear that I meant nothing to them. I was finally choosing for myself. And that felt better than any fake apology ever could. The first night in my new apartment was weirdly quiet. No background noise from the TV in the living room. No, hearing my parents talk about Elena's latest accomplishment. Just silence. And for the first time, I realized I had never really had that before. My whole life had been spent under their shadow. Now, it was just me, and I had never felt more at peace. At first, I expected constant calls and messages. Some kind of desperate attempt to reel me back in. But instead, nothing. Not a single text. Not a missed call. It was like I had never existed. And honestly, that hurt more than I wanted to admit. A week passed. Then another. Still silence. I told myself I didn't care. But deep down, it stung. Not because I wanted to go back, but because it proved what I had always feared. I was disposable to them. And they weren't even pretending otherwise. Then, one night, out of nowhere, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, finally, I answered. Alex, she said, her voice sickly sweet. It's been so long. How are you? I leaned back, crossing my arms. I'm fine. What do you want? A pause. Then she sighed dramatically. Well, your father and I have been talking, and we think it's time you come home. I blinked. Excuse me. You made your little point, she continued, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. But this has gone on long enough. It's time to stop being stubborn and come back where you belong. I laughed. Where do I belong? You mean in the background, while you continue treating Elena like royalty? Her voice turned cold. Alex, don't be ungrateful. We gave you a good life. No, you gave me a roof over my head. That's not the same as love. She scoffed. You're being ridiculous. We are your family. And that was the moment I snapped. No, Mom, you're Elena's family. I was just an extra. Silence. Then she sighed. Is that really how you see it? It's how you made it. Another pause. Then, in a much colder voice, she said, You'll regret this, Alex. Family is all you have. I smirked. No, Mom. Family is what you make it. And I finally found mine, without you. Then, I hung up. And this time, I blocked her number. For good. Hanging up on my mom felt like the final nail in the coffin. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking away from years of neglect, years of being treated like an afterthought, years of waiting for love that was never going to come. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt free. After blocking my mom, I braced myself for round two. Because if there was one thing I knew about my parents, they weren't the type to accept defeat. And sure enough, the next day, I got a text from Elena. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to even open it. Then, finally, I sighed and tapped the screen. Elena, hey, Mom and Dad are upset. You should talk to them. I rolled my eyes. Not, hey, I miss you. Not, hey, are you okay? Just damage control. Like always. I wasn't in the mood for this, but I decided to play along. They had their chance to talk to me. They spin it joking about how I was a mistake. Elena, it was just a joke. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Of course, she'd say that. Because to her, it was just a joke. To her, it was nothing. Because she had never been treated like she didn't belong. She had never sat in a room full of people laughing at her expense. But I had. And I was done pretending it didn't matter. Me, if it was just a joke, why did no one laugh with me? Why was I the only one who felt like garbage after? She took a while to reply. Then, finally, Elena, I don't know what you want me to say, Alex. I can't control what Mom and Dad do. And there it was. Not an apology. Not even a fake attempt at understanding. Just the same careless indifference I had grown up with. So I gave up. Me, you're right. You can't control them. But you also don't have to excuse them. She never responded. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then, slowly, I deleted her number. Because if she wasn't willing to be my sister when it actually mattered, then I wasn't going to force it. I was done chasing relationships that weren't real. And for the first time in my life, I felt okay with that. Deleting Elena's number felt like closing a door I should have shut years ago. For so long, I had been waiting for her to see me, waiting for her to acknowledge how unfair things had always been. But now, I finally understood. She wasn't going to, because she didn't have to. She had never been the one fighting for scraps. She had never been the one on the outside, looking in. And she never would be. Life without my parents and Elena was quiet. But it was a good kind of quiet. I wasn't waking up to backhanded comments about how I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't hearing about every little thing Elena accomplished, like she was the second coming of greatness. I wasn't being reminded, over and over again, that I was an afterthought. Instead, I was just living. For the first time, my life wasn't about them. It was about me. Then, about a month later, I got a message from an unexpected number. One of my aunts. We weren't close, but she had always been neutral in family drama. So when I saw her name pop up, I hesitated before opening it. Aunt Linda, hey, Alex. I just wanted to check in. I heard about what happened. I frowned, because as far as I knew, nobody had been talking about it. My parents had gone radio silent. No big, dramatic meltdown. No guilt-tripping messages flooding my phone. Just nothing. And that didn't sit right with me. I responded, me, thanks. But what do you mean you heard about what happened? It took her a few minutes to type back. Then, Aunt Linda, your parents are telling everyone you abandoned them. I laughed. Because, of course, they were. Of course, in their version of events, I was the bad guy. I had abandoned them, not the other way around. I sighed, rubbing my temple. I should have seen this coming. They weren't ignoring me. They were playing the long game, trying to turn the family against me before I had the chance to tell my side. Classic. Me. And what exactly are they saying? Aunt Linda, that you left out of nowhere. That you disrespected them. That you cut them off for no reason. I clenched my jaw. Because of that? That was textbook manipulation. Pretending the past never happened. Acting like I had just gotten up one day and decided, you know what? I think I'll ruin my entire family dynamic just for fun. It was insulting. And the worst part? Some people believed it. Aunt Linda, your uncle thinks you're being dramatic. Grandma says you should apologize. I exhaled slowly. Of course they do. Because that's the thing about family, isn't it? They always want peace. Even when that peace comes at the expense of the person who's been suffering in silence. They wanted me to let it go. To come back. To pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't. And it never had been. Me. You were at the graduation party. You heard what they said. Do you really think I'm being dramatic? A long pause. Then, Aunt Linda, no, I don't. That surprised me. She sent another message. Aunt Linda, I never thought they'd go that far. But you're right. They don't see you the way they see Elena. And that's not fair. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Because no one in my family had ever admitted that before. Not once. And I had to admit. That felt good. Me. Thanks. But if you're reaching out because you think I should fix things, don't bother. I'm done. Aunt Linda, I don't think you should fix things. I just think you deserve to be heard. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Because honestly, I had spent my whole life trying to be heard. And it never got me anywhere. So why should I start now? I sighed, setting my phone down. My parents were twisting the narrative. I knew that. But for once, I didn't feel like chasing the truth. I didn't feel like proving myself to people who had already made up their minds. They could say whatever they wanted, because at the end of the day, I knew what really happened, and that was enough. I didn't respond to Aunt Linda after that. Not because I was mad at her. She had been the only one to reach out without trying to manipulate me. But because, honestly, I didn't see the point. I had spent my whole life trying to get people to understand, trying to get my parents to see me, trying to get Elena to care, and I was done. I wasn't going to fight to correct the story they were telling. I wasn't going to go around explaining myself, trying to convince everyone that I wasn't some selfish, ungrateful son who abandoned his parents. They could think whatever they wanted, because at the end of the day, I knew the truth, and that was enough. For the next few months, my life got quieter, and honestly, it was the best thing that had ever happened to me. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more awkward family gatherings where I felt like a stranger in my own home. No more pretending I was okay with being treated like an afterthought. Just me, and my version of peace. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering, but eventually, I picked up. Hello. There was a pause. Then, hey Alex. It's Dad. I almost hung up on instinct. But something made me stay on the line. Because of this was the first time my dad had called since I left. And I wanted to know why. What do you want? I asked flatly. He sighed. I just wanted to check in. It's been a while. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Because last I heard, you and Mom were busy telling the family I abandoned you. Silence. Then, that's not exactly true. I laughed. Not exactly? So what part was true? The part where you pretended I had no reason to leave? Or the part where you acted like I just woke up one day and decided I didn't want a family? He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Look, Alex, he finally said. I know we've had our differences, but you're still our son. I scoffed. Am I? Because the last time I checked, you were laughing about how I was a mistake. More silence. Then, in a low voice, he muttered. We didn't mean it like that. I clenched my jaw. Because even now, he couldn't just say it. Couldn't just admit that what they did was cruel. That what they had done to me for years was wrong. They still wanted to pretend like it was nothing. Like I was the problem for caring. Why are you calling, Dad? I finally asked. He hesitated. Then he sighed again. Your mother misses you. I almost rolled my eyes. Of course. It was never about him. It was always about Mom. Always about how she felt. How she wanted things to go back to normal. Not once did he ask if I missed them. Because they already knew the answer. Tell her I don't feel the same way, I said simply. Dad exhaled sharply. Alex, come on. This is family. We're supposed to stick together. I shook my head. Family? Is that what we were? Because from where I'm standing, we were just people who happened to live in the same house. Another long pause. Then, in a quiet voice, he asked, Is there any way we can fix this? For a brief second, I thought about it. About what it would take for me to forgive them. But then I realized, they weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking for a reset. A way to pretend none of this had ever happened. A way to sweep it under the rug and go back to the way things were. And I wasn't interested. No, I said. There's not. Dad sighed heavily. So that's it then? That's it. A long pause. Then, finally, he muttered. Okay. And just like that, he hung up. I stared at my phone for a while. Not sad. Not angry. Just relieved. Because of that was the closest thing to closure I was ever going to get. And now, I could finally move on. Hanging up on my dad didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. A beginning where I wasn't waiting for my parents to change. A beginning where I wasn't clinging to some false hope that one day they'd wake up and realize how unfair they had been. A beginning where I chose myself. And honestly, I had never felt freer. Weeks passed, then months. I expected some last-ditch effort from them. One final attempt to drag me back in. But instead, nothing. No messages. No calls. No "we miss you" emails. And that silence? It told me everything. I used to think that if I ever left, they'd realize what they had lost. That they'd fight to get me back. That they'd finally see me as worth keeping. But the truth? I had always been the only one fighting. And when I finally stopped, they didn't chase me. They just moved on. Like I had never been there at all. It should have hurt. But it didn't. Because now, I wasn't looking for their validation. I wasn't hoping for some grand apology that was never going to come. I wasn't waiting for them to be the family I had always wanted. Because I had something better. I had me. A year passed. Then another. And you know what? My life became so much better without them in it. I built a home for myself, made real friendships, created my own version of family. Not one built on guilt or obligation, but one built on mutual respect and love. The kind I had never known growing up. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I got another email. From Elena. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity got the best of me. It was short. Too short. Hey, just wanted to let you know that mom and dad are struggling. You should reach out. I laughed. Because, of course, now I was worth reaching out to. Now that their golden child couldn't fix their problems. Now that they realized they needed me. Funny how that worked. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I typed out a response. I hope they find the help they need. But it won't be from me. And then, I blocked her. Because I was done. I had spent too much time trying to be enough for people who never deserved me.